Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, August 9th, 2021, and with all this discussion around 2021 and 2022, I've decided to jump just a few years ahead to 2024 to talk about the Republican presidential race here that is unfolding, with many potential contenders already visiting early states such as Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada in an early effort to win over donors and top Republicans across these states. Now, the reason why I think that this is notable is because 2024 is a year where we start to see early indications for 3 years ahead of time, the same way we started to see discussions about Hillary Clinton running for office in 2013, the same way Obama was questioned about whether or not he would run in 2008 and 2006. Early indicators sometimes are one of the best, especially when it comes down to presidential races and presidential primaries. Now, this article was published back in May of 2021, so it's a bit outdated when it talks about the timelines relating to certain candidates or relating to certain contenders, potential contenders for 2024. But the reason why I was reminded of it is because at the Republican National Convention or Committee Summer Meeting, they actually started talking about the 2024 elections and how this was something that was going to be very, very important. And the RNC chair, McDaniel, saying that they don't believe 2024 happens for Republicans if they do not win in 2022. So a lot is on the line here for Republicans if they do not win in 2022, and a lot of discussion circulating around 2024, which sort of means that there seems to be a lot of hidden discussion about 2024. If they are revealing this to media websites such as Fox News to, in a sense, publicly go out and say that they are already thinking about 2024, someone else must have brought it up. Someone else must have brought it up by a pretty considerable amount with some very notable names. Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Kristi Noem, whoever it might be. 2024 certainly seems to be a topic of discussion for Republicans around the nation. So looking at this early 2024 moves article, they essentially go through all of the Republicans that are visiting a number of top states. And if you're taking a look at the 2024 nomination, the earliest states that vote in presidential primaries are Iowa, Ohio, Nevada, and South Carolina. Those are the 4 states that are routinely visited by presidential contenders or potential presidential contenders very early on. And as this article suggests, it says here that many Republicans are already here. Now, I first want to point out that I am not going to be mentioning President Trump's name as often as you might expect. The reason being that he isn't one of these Republicans that seems to be visiting states such as Iowa, New Hampshire, or Nevada. The reason being he doesn't need to win over these donors. He already has them in his pockets, as he got them in 2016, as he got them in 2020, as he is getting them for 2022. 2024 will come easy to President Trump should he decide to run, which is why he doesn't seem to be too personally invested in what's happening here. What we're going to be looking at, though, are candidates such as Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Rick Scott, Tom Scott, Tom Cotton, Ron DeSantis, Kristi Noem, looking around the nation from South Dakota to South Carolina, recognizable names for the GOP. So, let's take a look. It says here that many notable Republicans are starting to visit the state of Iowa, increasingly bringing the state up to a national presence back again after a very hotly contentious presidential election in 2020. I mean, looking at where the Democratic Party seems to be revealing a lot of its weaknesses relative to the 2020 election, Iowa seems to be a state that might be of some type of concern, considering that it wasn't a safe Republican state, but Donald Trump won it by a pretty large amount. Republicans visiting this state are already revealing their hand about what they have in mind for 2024, even if they don't want to directly acknowledge it. Many Republicans on the list here have already declined running in 2024, even though they are visiting these states so early on. You can't lie about where you're visiting if you're speaking at some type of statewide convention. And they always use this guise of, quote, raising money for the state party. Well, I have to ask, Chuck Grassley, as the incumbent senator for 2022, hasn't even announced that he's running for United States Senate. Not one notable Republican contender has announced that they are running for 2022 Senate. So what type of money are you raising for? What money is needed in the state of Iowa? Looking at the recent election results in 2020, Donald Trump obliterated Joe Biden relative to a number of other swing states. So to say that Republicans are in some type of increased need in this state is really facetious and largely said just as a guise in order to sort of not indicate that you're running for president in 2024 or that you're even considering it. But many top Republicans are visiting the state of Iowa, and I can list them here. You have Nikki Haley visiting the state of Iowa. You have Mike Pompeo routinely visiting the state of Iowa, even though he is saying that he is not going to be running 100% for sure. You also have Tom Scott, Rick Scott visiting the state of Iowa. You have Tom Cotton visiting the state of Iowa, and Kristi Noem also visiting that state. I mean, looking at what the Republicans seem to be personally invested in this state, there is no real reason for them to be here other than the fact that they are considering a bid for the presidency in 2024, because it's certainly not one of the closest states on the presidential level. There isn't really a Senate race in 2022 that they need to be heavily worried about, or really the governor election or the House elections. Republicans have full control over what happens there. So all around, looking at the state of Iowa, there's no real reason as to why the GOP needs to be there, other than potentially running for president in 2024. And you can see it here. And if you want to take a look at the polling update with polls without Donald Trump, again, I'm not going to be talking about him much. Who do you have? Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence. Now, neither of these two are visiting the state of Iowa, which is quite interesting to see. But then you also have to ask, maybe some of these Republicans are visiting because they aren't doing too well in the preliminary election data. Mike Pence, of course, has that name recognition. He's actually up in the state of New Hampshire, visiting that state. Ron DeSantis is across the country. He's actually supposed to speak at an event in the state of Nevada. So you have Pence up in New Hampshire, you have Ron DeSantis over in the state of Nevada, and the stragglers seem to be focusing on Iowa. The people that are lagging behind in the polling data, even though they may have recognizable names amongst the GOP, are focusing on a state that is otherwise pretty solid for the GOP, largely, I think, in an effort to win over more and more of these Republican voters and to win over donors ahead of the presidential elections. Because looking at a lot of these presidential contenders, they have very much been running for president their entire lives. They didn't get to this position of the vice president of the United States of America or the governor of the state of Florida or the United Nations ambassador by chance. These are not things that just so happen to fall onto them as, the grace of God or luck and wit. What happened in a lot of these circumstances for all of these potential names, Ted Cruz, Tucker Carlson, Josh Hawley, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Mitt Romney, etc., all of these people have a motive. And that motive for many of them continues to be the White House. And they will do everything they can. They will claw their way up. They will build their way up. Whatever it is, they will try to reach that position. And that's what we're starting to see now. I mean, while the primary elections are 2 years away, that gives them 2 years of time to campaign before the first ballots are cast for 2024. More than 2 years, to be completely honest with you. So, looking at it from an outsider point of view, there is no real reason why Nikki Haley needs to be up in Iowa other than the fact that she wants to be president of the United States one day. And the same can be applied to many of these candidates. But I pointed out Mike Pence and Ron DeSantis for a reason. They are top two, have been top two for months in the polling data. And there's a reason why those two don't seem too personally invested in Iowa as much as potentially Mike Pompeo, who routinely visits that state, largely seen from members of the right-wing media, the left-wing media, those who are not part of a partisan media source, largely as an effort to win over donors, because this is the way that it's done. When you take a look at 2016, you can take a look at the preliminary election data. You can see how long this race has been polled, how long we were talking about it. This was August of 2013, July of 2013. And you can take a look here. Look at some of these top contenders. I mean, you're talking about 2013. This is right around the time period. In fact, maybe we can find the exact day of August 9th, 2013. This is a flashback 3 years before the 2016 presidential election. Who do you have? Top names of people that were visiting around the nation, right? Chris Christie, 18%. He lasted a pretty long time. He was actually in first place at this time. Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, all very recognizable names now, did very well in the early numbers because they made names for themselves. They were visiting these states early. And the reason why they were being polled is because we knew that they were going to run for president. Take a look at every single person on this list. Chris Christie, did he end up running? Yes. Rand Paul, did he end up running? Yes. Marco Rubio, yes. Jeb Bush, yes. Ted Cruz, Scott Walker, Rick Perry, did they end up running for president? Yes, they did. And they were the ones who were topping this list at a pretty high amount. Now, they did not include all of the data in terms of who was in the polls back then. You can actually take a closer look. Why don't we just go ahead and see if they have the fluctuating polling data here? But you can see here that primarily speaking, those who were mentioned in these early polls that were visiting states such as New Hampshire, visiting states such as Iowa. They were included because they were here. They were at these states, and they were actively campaigning for 2016, whether they had been very open about it or not. Because at the end of the day, you can read the tea leaves very accurately when it comes down to presidential primaries. Like I had been saying multiple times this entire video, there's no real reason for Republicans to be in the state of Iowa, other than the fact that they want to run for president in 2024. And instead of visiting a state such as Iowa, they may start to reveal things to the press, may start to fuel speculation about whether or not they're deciding to run. But for many of these candidates, in addition to visiting states such as Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada, for the case of Ron DeSantis, they are also talking about potentially running in 2024 or allowing their surrogates to go out to the media and leave it open for discussion. Because these candidates themselves are the only real ones who can actually speak and announce whether or not they are or are not going to run. But for those who are closest to them, I mean, you will start to see media reports saying Ron DeSantis' closest allies say he's gearing up for a 2024 bid. That's not by accident. That is Ron DeSantis testing the waters with the media. That's Ron DeSantis getting his name out there. When you're a Republican voter in the state of North Dakota, chances are you haven't heard of Ron DeSantis as much as a Republican in the state of Florida. DeSantis knows he has Florida locked down and potentially a number of other states, but if you see a Fox News alert come across your phone as a Republican saying Ron DeSantis is gearing up a 2024 bid, all of a sudden you're intrigued. While he may not necessarily have revealed it personally as himself, a surrogate might have gone out on the media and said it then, and then that allows voters around the nation to figure out who this guy is and potentially consider supporting him. In 2016, just the unfortunate reality was that none of these Republicans could overcome the name recognition that Donald Trump had. I remember vividly watching CNN back in 2015 when Donald Trump announced his bid for the presidency that people were saying he's a household name. He's already up in the polling data because people know who Donald Trump is. Donald Trump is around media circulation. He was popular because of his attacks on President Obama. He's a recognizable name because he was viewed as a political opportunist, someone who had backed both sides routinely when they ended up winning elections. What happened here for Donald Trump was a matter of name recognition. And if Donald Trump decides to run again in 2024, obviously the name recognition will come before all. But amongst this potential candidate list, there aren't any top tier names like Donald Trump that can be recognizable left and right. These candidates need to go to Iowa because they need the money for 2024. They are going to New Hampshire and Nevada because they need the donors. They need the early level of support in order to build off a presidential campaign, because these things do not happen overnight. The gears are already turning. You are already starting to see this snowball effect of many of these Republicans start to outpace each other when it comes down to many of these races. And if you take a look at the predicted market, which unfortunately I do not have in front of me, but you can go to predicted.org and check out the 2024 market there, 6 out of the 8 people on the top 8 most likely to become the 2024 GOP nominee, 6 out of the 8 are visiting early states. The only 2 that seemingly aren't are Donald Trump, and Donald Trump really doesn't need to, and Ted Cruz, who arguably doesn't need to. Ted Cruz probably has a lot of name recognition, at least compared to maybe Mike Pompeo or Tim Scott, just because he was the runner-up in 2016 and has continued to make a very strong name for himself. So, with the RNC talking about 2024, it seems that this primary race has been underway for quite some time now. With many of these Republicans visiting across the nation, it is very clear what their intentions are. Iowa is a priority target. Nevada is a priority target. New Hampshire is a priority target. Major events are really good indicators as to whether or not someone is going to run. When Hillary Clinton decided to go on a tour around the nation, was that coincidental? Absolutely not. When Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden decided in 2014 they were going to be heavily invested in the midterms, what does a former Secretary of State want to do with the midterm elections? Well, put her name out there and get around the nation in any way that she can. Joe Biden, in his case, very similar fashion. Looking at what happened ahead of 2016, what happened ahead of 2020 for Democrats, I think that it is very clear what the early signs were. And we're already starting to see them ahead of 2024. I'm not going to say officially that I expect every single one of these Republicans to announce that they're running, especially if Donald Trump decides to enter himself into the presidential candidacy pool, but I would not be surprised if many of these Republicans ended up running. So Major takeaways here. What are we expecting to see? What are we going to be talking about for 2024? Essentially, the GOP primaries begin now. They have already started to happen. It's way too much of a coincidence for all of these Republicans to be in the exact same place, speaking to the exact same people with a lot of money. Too much of a coincidence. And also, just to reiterate, Donald Trump does not need the support. He already has it. You can see his amount of support in Iowa in the presidential election, in that general election. Donald Trump may have lost Iowa in 2016. He's certainly not losing it in 2024 if he decides to run. And another point, that Chuck Grassley hasn't even announced that he's running. No major Republicans announced that they are running in 2022. 2022, Iowa is probably one of the lesser swing states out of all of the swing states. While it may be closer than it has been in the past, it's certainly not as close as Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, states within flyable distance of Iowa that Republicans don't seem to be particularly as invested in as the state that seems to be one of the first in the union in terms of deciding who the next president of the United States would be. Looking at these Republicans across the nation, obviously this is a very good indicator of what they are planning for the future, but more is to be seen by the end of the year and by the midterm elections. There's a lot to unpack, a lot to speculate, and a lot to look at for a lot of these top Republicans. So keep your eyes peeled, make sure you're watching the races, look at when these events are planned, where they are planned, because they are perfect and near accurate indicators of who's going to be running for president in the future, and they can absolutely be applied starting today and yesterday for 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.